Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar with an experience feedback from a specific client on a role mining project. My name is Khadija El Afrit, and I am a professional services consultant at Brainwave GRC, which is an identity analytics and compliance software vendor. In a few minutes, you will meet my co-hosts, David Giorgetti and Xavier Retel, who are both from the consulting firm Wavestone. Okay, so imagine a hospital that would need to kick off a role mining project in the midst of a pandemic outbreak. All their medical teams would be dealing with life or death stakes. They will be swamped, and IT teams are afraid of disrupting the information system and sorting through their Active Directory and application data that are loaded with quality issues. What a puzzle that would be, right? So this is not a sci-fi movie plot, but that's the actual story from a former client of ours. So I am pleased today to co-host this webinar with our partner Wavestone. Our panelists, David Giorgetti and Xavier Retel, conducted this role mining project, this exact project, with a hospital in such extreme conditions, and they will tell you more about how they played the role mining game. Before we start, please note that you can use the chat feature to ask questions, and we will address those questions at the end of the webinar. If you do not receive a live response, please be sure to check your mailbox in case we contact you later on. Okay, so let's introduce Brainwave and Wavestone first before we get into the project feedback. So with over 10 years of experience, Brainwave products are used by thousands of users and companies around the world. So we have two offices, one in Europe and one in North America, in order to stay close to our clients and to their business needs, either on identity analytics or on compliance features. Many of our clients have left their 5-star reviews related to our expertise through Gartner's Peer Insight tools. And on the bottom right part of the screen, you can see just a sample of these customers that are listed, mostly in the banking and healthcare industry. Now I leave the floor to my colleagues from Wavestone so that they can introduce themselves and tell you more about their project feedback.
Thank you, Khadija. So I'm David Giorgetti. I'm Senior Manager at Wavestone. Let me introduce Wavestone in a few words. So Wavestone is a global consultancy with over 3,000 employees across 8 countries. We are a leading independent player in European consulting, and we have a practice dedicated to cybersecurity with 3 key differentiators. First, our innovative and maker approach. We don't hesitate to get our hands dirty and reinvent ourselves on the classical topics of cybersecurity. So it's consulting plus expertise combined. Because cybersecurity is at the heart of business issues, we have developed targeted security materials such as sectorial benchmark, so that we can provide added values, even more added values to some industries. And we are a trusted player thanks to our recognized expertise in incident response, the contribution to worldwide cybersecurity conferences, and the development of specific tooling that we share with our clients and the community to accelerate the mission. Of course, identity and access management, which is the topic of today, is a substantial part of our cybersecurity engagement. And today we are pleased to share some feedback about a role mining project that we have done last year, as explained by Khadija. So I will present our feedback on this mission with Xavier Retel, who is a consultant at Wavestone as well. So the question for today is, what if role mining were a game to play? The philosophy behind this rhetoric question is to say that if you like playing games, you should find this exercise quite interesting, and maybe your vision of a role mining project will shift to a more, let's say, entertaining activity. So for that, let me share some context about the project we had last years. We work for a rather big hospital with 20,000 users, and this hospital had launched an identity and access management project. As you may know, such a project is not just coping with the technical debt. It's not just automating tasks. It's also a question of new habits in terms of identity lifecycle and authorization management. So the idea with the role mining project was to complement the new tooling that is being put in place, so that at launch, the solution will also include a new authorization model. So the first game we played during this role mining engagement was what we call the data maze. So why the data maze? Because it consists of navigating. It consists in navigating among identity and authorization data. So we talk about 10,000 permissions, 500,000 authorizations assigned to users in this hospital. And so the objective was to make sense of all of this data and improve the data quality. You can see an example of the files that we have received from different sources, the HR information system, Active Directory mainly, plus legacy authorization systems. So we had to make the link, to correlate, to do the reconciliation between all the information in these files, and determine how we will use all this data. Of course, these files had different naming convention, not the same exact list of users or information. So we had to spend some time correlating all this data. This is in fact quite common in every enterprise context where you don't have a single or reliable source for this kind of data. So to succeed in this part of the project, you have to first give yourself time. It took about 6 weeks for us to remove all the noise and to stabilize the data model with an acceptable level of quality in terms of exhaustivity, naming convention, to ensure that the permissions we are working with are meaningful, and also to determine the good depth level. Basically, if you look at the organizational hierarchy, you have to determine if you go deep into the organizational structures, or if a higher level will be enough to do your role mining. This is the same situation for the job functions, the job description. You may have some generic job functions, 20 or 25 of such functions, but if you go deeper into the detailed function, the number can be 10 times this number. So determining the good depth of information is also really important in that project phase. So what are your assets if you want to succeed? I mentioned the fact that you need to give yourself time, but also the idea is really to go with the test and learn approach. So with several iterations where you test some hypotheses, you try to determine some clues for data correlation. And in addition to the tooling that you put to reproduce the operation, to repeat the operation several times, it's also a best practice to define some KPIs in terms of completeness of data quality, so that you can progress, see the progress on your data modeling, and also prefer some options in terms of correlation, in terms of selection of data, to prefer some options rather than other. So this is an important part if you want to do some many iteration. You have to build the appropriate tooling So typically, we based our tooling on the Brainwave GRC product. Maybe Khadija, you want to highlight some of the features that your tool provides?
Yes, indeed. So thank you, David, for zooming in the screenshots. So basically within Brainwave, we enable this data discovery phase in two ways. First, we have a whole studio where users and consultants can configure the way that application and authorization data can be imported. You may have in this kind of context files that are provided by an IT team that is either afraid of tampering or changing the data in case it would cause a disruption in the information system, or an IT team that may not have time to address your requirements and to provide an adequate extract. So whatever the extract that they give you, whether it's a CSV format or a text format, it's totally possible to import that in Brainwave and also configure all the rules and data quality improvements within our solution so that you can apply these rules and normalizations to the file outside of the actual information system. And then we also offer some features to facilitate the reconciliation between accounts and identities, between permissions and accounts. And these correlation features will end up giving you some very useful and valuable KPIs. So some of these KPIs are visible in the bottom part of the screen. And it can also help you correlate the proper permissions and link them to the proper identities, which is an essential step to be done as a prerequisite before a role mining project.
Thank you, Khadija. Then we will go with the second game. With the second game that we played for this role mining engagement. I will leave the floor to Xavier, who will explain you this interesting part, which is what we have done with the data.
Sure. So let's move on to our second game that we call the authorization puzzle. So now that we have worked our way through the data maze, it's now time to create the actual roles. So this is truly a key phase in the role mining process. And usually it's best practice to organize workshops during which we can build the roles by strongly combining the business and the technical visions, which is always a tricky exercise as it's often unheard of in an enterprise context, but still key in the role mining process. So what are the key assets for this game? So the first one is the ability to mobilize people with the right knowledge and who will be able to make the right decisions regarding the authorization model. So these are people who are both well-versed in the company processes, the organizational structure, how the applications work, and what security rules are in place. So most often it's never a single person, and most often it's a small team of representatives from both the business and the technical teams, and that's often quite hard to find. And the second asset is in choosing the right perimeters. So beginning by the more business-oriented perimeters, which are both easier to model and where the model will have the strongest impact. So perhaps do not begin with technical IT teams, for instance. And the second aspect of this perimeter choice is that the perimeters should have the right volume, so not too small so as not to organize too many workshops, and also not too big so as to facilitate the modeling process and be specific enough. So the balance is hard to find, but it's truly key to the success of the method. Now, all this was in theory because, as you know, because of the COVID crisis, and especially as our client was in the healthcare sector, we had no business contacts available, so we could not organize those workshops. So what we did was we had to adjust our approach to continue the delivery of the project. And what we did is we played pretend and we used the tools as if we were in an actual modeling workshops, taking the part of the various business representatives. So we worked on the modeling on two pilot perimeters, one in quite a limited scope, so about 400 people with 9,000 authorizations, and one slightly bigger, so about 1,000 people with 30,000 authorizations to see if we could scale our methodology. And as you can see, the results were quite promising, as we had about 70% of coverage with a very limited set of roles, so 18 roles in the first pilot and 27 roles in the second pilot. Of course, we had no business contact to challenge this model, but we still managed to challenge and validate the results we had with our security correspondents in our clients. So we were at least somewhat confident in them.
So, Xavier, as we discussed many times before within our meetings, you were personally using Brainwave to conduct this role modeling in the absence of available business contacts. Could you maybe enhance one or two specific features within Brainwave that were especially helpful for you when you were doing that job of when you were doing that authorization puzzle precisely?
Sure. So I'd say the first one is the data visualization capabilities of the tool. So as you can see on the top, there's the dynamic cross tab, which we use to filter the permissions. So we could filter on specific dimensions. We had the colors from the various roles. As you can see, we could also reorder everything. So it was quite visual. And also we had progress bar on the top, from which we could have a live coverage estimation. What we also found interesting was the global roles notion. So for those highly assigned permissions that are assigned to almost everyone, so perhaps some technical permissions such as the access to the VPN or things like that, we could hide them and thus exclude them from the modeling phase. So we could reduce the noise in the authorizations and truly ease the modeling phase. Also, we had this automatic clustering tool, which is available in the cross tab, which truly facilitated the grouping of the permissions. And perhaps a last point, in the bottom capture, you can see the global progress bar. And so we had this view in the global dashboard with indicators for the progress for each perimeter, which was truly helpful.
Sure, I guess those features could really be helpful both in terms of project management as for the KPIs, and also in terms of business coverage and progress when it comes to designing roles to apply to the targeted business teams. Thank you for that highlights, Xavier.
And then we did not stop with the pilot perimeters, Xavier. We continued the project.
Yes, so let's move on to our last game, which we named Guess Who the Role is For. So based on the results on our two pilot organizations, we saw that our methodology seemed to be the right one. But as we could not pursue the traditional methodology with workshops, we decided instead to assess the overall potential of the redesigned model so as to have and be able to share a global overview of the results that could be expected. So two objectives here. First one is to automate the role modeling process to generalize on the entire scope, so the whole 20,000 collaborators of the hospital, and go a step further by identifying the assignment rules, so to know what roles should be given to whom. So the assets for this game, so for the model industrialization, we created some custom scripting which replicated our methodology and algorithm. So in our context, as you can see on the right, in our Africa context, but it could also work in other contexts, but would have to be refined. So we worked with an iterative algorithm based on the similarity of the assignments, based on different dimensions. So the first dimension we looked at was the job functions. So for instance, if 90% of nurses have a specific permission, we created a role with that permission, and then we assign all this role to all the nurses. Then we look, for instance, at all the nurses who are in a specific organization, and so on with all the dimensions. So we looked at the job function, then the cross between job function and first level of organization, then the cross with second level and a third level, and so on. At the end, we have a list of eligible roles and rules among which you can select the most profitable. That is those that address the most rights, so as not to have too many roles in the end. What was nice is with this automation in place, you could easily implement the test and learn approach that we mentioned earlier. And so we could play easily with the dimensions. So we could change the order, make cross-dimensional analysis and so on, and also tweak the parameters. So the similarity thresholds and the profitability thresholds, what we mentioned just before. And we had the results with the push of a button, which was quite nice. What we did then is we could compare our results with our reference, so the two pilot parameters. And well, we are aware of the limitations of this exercise because as we could not organize the usual workshops, it was impossible for us to question the legitimacy of the current authorizations. And thus we are truly dependent on the current data quality. At the end of the day, our estimated results are quite promising. So about 2/3 of the users were covered by the authorization model, so had a role assigned, and 2/3 of the 500,000 authorizations were covered with the automated model. Of course, this model still needs to be refined during workshop, but it's still a good starting point once the business are available.
Yes, so it's of course totally legitimate that due to the large number of accesses and identities that you had to compute, you had to resort to identity analytics software such as Brainwave and to scripting algorithms. But that's not the only assets that you had to play with. You of course needed also to display some to manifest some expertise and to let's say to identify some rules and some criteria. And that kind of identification and that kind of methodology was of course a key asset to reach a successful role mining project. That's actually one of our shared beliefs, that you need to combine both software and methodology and expertise in order to reach the most relevant role model that is possible for one's organization.
Thank you, Khadija. And just to conclude, after these three games that we have presented, I think we can say that yes, role mining can be a game to play, or even several games to play, be it the data maze, the puzzle, the authorization puzzle, or the guess who this role is for. But contrary to typical gaming rules, here you can choose your assets beforehand. The right approach with test and learn, KPI-driven approach, and the right tooling for correlation, data visualization, and automation. So with these assets, we are confident that you can manage such a role mining project. So we hope you now find role mining more entertaining and that you are ready to go all in with such a project, or at least to give it a try. If you want to know more about authorization model in general, here is a link to 2 articles that present the key question to ask yourself when redesigning your authorization model. So do not hesitate to have a look to these articles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David and Xavier, for this awesome presentation. We may have a couple of minutes to take some questions from the audience. Let's take this first question. So, what are the next steps for this project? Where are you in terms of progress today?
Well, as Xavier mentioned, so we have done the modeling in an automated way for all the perimeters, thanks to the additional scripting that we have put in place. So we hope that key business representative will recover some availability in the near future, so that we can challenge the model during workshops. So to go back to the standard methodology, to challenge the result, and also to challenge the current authorization, because as Xavier mentioned, we were dependent of the current data quality, and we could not challenge or fix some incorrect data. So the next step will be to have the workshops with the business representative. And when we have a stabilized model, the model will be used by the identity and access management solution that is currently under construction. And the objective will be to streamline the authorization processes and the authorization model with the new tool and the new data that we are providing.
Sure. Yeah, these are very important next steps indeed to roll out the role model that you designed to make sure that it's relevant as soon as the business stakeholders can become available again. So yeah, fingers crossed for these next steps, actually. The second question is related to the way to play the role mining game. So due to the COVID context, of course, many board game brands have decided to develop online versions or other kinds of software providers have created many versions of famous games online. So what about conducting a role mining workshop or a role mining project in a remote way with video conference workshops? Would it be possible for you or not? What is your opinion on that?
Well, in our case, in fact, we didn't have any workshops because the issue was the availability of the business representative. So we could imagine some remote workshop on that topics. The idea, as we mentioned, is to have several knowledge among different persons. So it could be easier with on-site workshops, in my opinion, as a fallback mode. I would say we could imagine some workshop in a remote way.
Okay, well, thank you so much, David, for these inputs. So before we end this webinar, I just would like to remind you all that you can, of course, contact us either at Wavestone or at Brainwave through our respective websites. So brainwavegrc.com on our side. And David, maybe you can remind the URL of your own website.
Yeah, wavestone.com.
All right, and both of our companies are also available on social media, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter. So please feel free to reach us, whether your requirements are targeted to Wavestone or to Brainwave GRC. Okay, that's the end of our webinar. So thank you so much, David and Xavier.
Thank you, Kedia.
Thank you.
And I wish to everyone a nice rest of the day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Goodbye.